Good afternoon, Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner.
Good afternoon.
My name's Allan Honner. I'm a lawyer at the Democracy Fund. We share standing with the JCCF and Citizens for Freedom, although we are separate organizations. Can we just pull up PB NSC.can.405820? So, Commissioner, this is a question for you. If we can just scroll down to the top of page 2, what we see here is that there's an email here from Jody Thomas. You have to look down to where it says original message. And this is dated February 21st, 2022. And Jody Thomas, the National Security Intelligence Advisor, says, "Good morning. Jeff has put pen to paper."
I don't see that.
Do you see that?
No.
Okay, so, sorry, scroll down just a little bit more. My apologies. A little bit more. Top of page 2. Scroll down more.
Page 3.
Okay, I'm sorry, scroll up. A little bit more.
Maybe the top of page 3.
Let me just, I'll just check to make sure I have the right document here. This is a version of it. Okay, well, let's stay with this document here. Commissioner, do you recognize this document?
No.
Do you know if there would be any reason why Jody Thomas would be asking you and other people for reasons to, for comments on criteria for revoking the Emergencies Act?
Oh, is that what it is? Okay, so.
Do you recall being asked about that?
What conditions? I know that there was talk about as soon as the second the Emergency Act was invoked, the next question was when they undo that. And so they would have no idea. Obviously, it would be probably on a law enforcement lead to say that, okay, we don't need it anymore in cooperation with the people who put the act in the first place.
Okay, but why would they be consulting you about that?
Because I was the contact for law enforcement, and so I'm imagining they're looking at what date is this? The 21st. So the 21st would have been right around the time that that was when police operations were just finishing up, and they were wondering if we needed any of the authorities to continue. So that's probably why they were asking.
Okay, so can we look at the top of the page, please?
Counsel, if it's any help, are you still looking for that Jeff has put pen on paper reference?
Sorry, can you just scroll up?
On page 4, there's that reference, I think.
No, that's okay. Just scroll
Okay.
up, please. Okay, so there's an email here from Brian Brennan, and he's one of the deputy commissioners at the RCMP.
Yes, of contract and Indigenous policing.
And he makes a comment here about Rob Stewart, and he says, Rob Stewart talks about assessing the threat in terms of violence versus truckers hanging around. Not sure this is the best point of view, given that there was no serious violence in Ottawa, the main reason for the Emergencies Act, but there was such a threat in Coutts, but was handled with already existing authorities, even though we could have used the EA in Coutts to support the operation. Plus, truckers hanging around is how bridges and points of entry become blockades. Do you agree with the remarks of your deputy commissioner here?
Not in the way that he's put it, no. There's a lot to unpack there, so I can't say I agree with everything that's being said.
So let me ask you about something else then. We heard earlier today that the integrated planning team presented you and OPP Commissioner Creek with a plan on February the 13th, and you told us that you found that plan to be satisfactory.
Yes, we were briefed on that plan on the 11th.
In your witness statement, I put it to you that you described that plan differently. You said that it was an amazing plan and you wanted to see it actioned promptly.
Yes.
Okay. And your evidence today was that you were the window to law enforcement for cabinet.
Well, I was the primary contact for the federal government.
Right. And so I'm confused about whether you actually attended the IRB meeting and the cabinet meeting of February the 13th. I thought you said in your evidence that you weren't sure if you attended those meetings.
Well, no, the question was whether I spoke at those meetings. I know I attended.
Okay, so you attended, but you're not sure if you spoke. And my friend from the government of Saskatchewan brought this to you, but if we could, brought this up with you, but if we could pull up the cabinet meeting, that's ssm.nsc.can 50216. Okay, so if we go to page 8, you are not giving the situational report here. Advisor Jody, NSIA advisor Jody Thomas is giving that situational report. Why is that? Because I thought you usually gave those situational reports.
Yes, I usually did. And I think because she would give an overview on those meetings and I would give an overview, and I think they just wanted to condense it. So they asked her to do it. And so she had normally given a bit of an overview. So I gave her my notes if she wanted to incorporate anything in that.
Okay, and let's go to the cabinet meeting. Sorry, this is the cabinet meeting.
That's the IRG, I think.
This is 216. So let's go to ssm.can.5095, maybe 6 zeros. And what we're looking at here is, I believe it's the incident response group meeting from February the 13th. And if we can scroll down to page 5, please. Here we see the Minister of Public Safety is outlining the great progress that has been made on clearing the Ambassador Bridge. He talks about enforcement actions that are occurring at Coots and Emerson, and he talks about the establishment of the Integrated Command Center in Ottawa. And he describes that as a significant concrete action. But what he's giving here, it seems to me, is an update on law enforcement. Do you agree about that?
Is not what?
Isn't this an update about law enforcement?
It's an update of the situation on the ground that is by law enforcement, yes.
And that's something that you would usually give, but you didn't give it that day.
No.
Okay. And both of these documents that we just looked at, they're heavily redacted, but I don't see you speaking on either of those days, although the documents confirm that you were in attendance.
Yeah, as per previous documents revealed, I think it was in an email, it shows that I wasn't going to be speaking and that the NSIA was going to.
Right. No, I saw that. And do you think that you were not invited to speak because you had reservations about invoking the Emergencies Act?
No, not at all, because the primary purpose of that day was all about the Emergencies Act. And I think that the fact that they had because normally I'm just giving a situational report on what's happening from coast to coast. I wasn't going to be talking about the Emergencies Act anyways. What I'd normally give is a sit rep, so maybe they were just in the economy of time.
My friend from Commission Council earlier today brought you to a request for a security assessment, which was directed to Adriano Paulez and not to the RCMP. And was that perhaps because you had reservations about the invocation of the Emergencies Act. Commissioner, I know I'm just about out of time.
I wasn't aware of that request for a threat assessment, so it wouldn't have been attached to the
Excuse me.
Emergency Act specifically.
And it's not connected
Excuse me,
to...
but in addition, I think you've mischaracterized the evidence. Ms. Palazzo is with the RCMP.
Right, okay. So she was asked, but you were not asked.
I don't do threat assessments, so
Okay.
she would have been asked.
But you were not even notified about it.
No, and nor would I be at my level.
You learned about that today.
Yes.
Okay. And I just want to show you very quickly the email of February the 14th. This is ssm.nsc.can 50216. And it's this email in which you express your reservations to Minister Mendicino about invoking the Emergencies Act because there are other existing tools at law that haven't been exhausted. And I just want to show you the time of that email. I believe it's sent just after midnight, but if we're doing Greenwich Meridian time, that would be 5 hours back.
Yes.
So I think between 7 and 8 o'clock.
Council, I think, was that the SSM 216 that you just mentioned?
Yes,
SSM NSC CAN 216 goes back to cabinet minutes.
okay, that's fine. Do you recall the email was showed to you earlier today and it was dated, it was timestamped just after midnight?
I can't recall the time stamp.
Okay, well, would you take it from me that it was timestamped just after midnight? Or should I pull it up?
Okay, sure. You know what, I have no idea, so I'm,
Okay, and if we deduct 5 hours, that brings us between 7 and 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And you would agree with me that's shortly before the cabinet meeting happened on February the 13th.
you sound like you've done your research, so I'll take your word for you.
Okay. And so before that cabinet meeting was held, Minister Mendicino and others knew about your position on the Emergencies Act.
Yes, in fact, if it was before the cabinet meeting.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next is the CCF.
Thank you. So my name is Janani Shanmuganathan, and I am counsel for the Canadian Constitution Foundation, and my questions are for Commissioner Lucki. So earlier today, when Commission Counsel was asking you questions, he brought up discussions with federal ministers about RCMP taking over the Ottawa Police Service, and you responded and said, you know, that was an issue that you were asked about often, and that you had to explain that the RCMP was not the police of jurisdiction in Ottawa. You recall that?
Yes, but I think I'd have to correct myself. It wasn't often, it was brought up a couple of times.
Sure, and the response was, you know, the RCMP is not the police of jurisdiction in Ottawa.
And nor do we have any jurisdiction in Ontario for that type of policing.
Okay, so I want to just talk a little bit about this notion of jurisdiction, okay? So I want to take you to the RCMP Act, and Mr. Registrar, that's CCF 6029. And if I can ask to be taken to page 20, please. If you could just scroll down and just stop there, great. So Section 18 of the RCMP Act, 18A specifically, sets out the duties of peace officers, the duties of RCMP officers. And what 18A says is, it is the duty of members who are peace officers subject to the orders of the commissioner, A, to perform all duties that are assigned to peace officers in relation to the preservation of the peace, the prevention of crime, and of offenses against the laws of Canada. And it goes on to say, and the laws enforced in any province in which they may be employed, and the apprehension of criminals and offenders and others who may be lawfully taken into custody. So you'll agree that this is the provision that sets out sort of the powers of RCMP officers. Yes?
Yes,
And, where it says the prevention of crime and of offenses against the laws of Canada, that's part of the federal policing mandate of enforcing federal statutes. You'll agree?
not necessarily, because anybody can enforce federal statutes. It's not just a federal law enforcement. Provincial and municipal police services can also enforce federal statutes, like the CDSA, the Drugs and Substance Act, for example.
Okay, so you'll agree, though, that RCMP officers have the power to enforce the criminal code, for instance,
Yes,
right? And they always have the power to enforce the criminal code. It's just part of what they're allowed to do,
yes,
right? They don't need to be sort of the local police in a jurisdiction. This is a power that they always have,
yes,
right? And there's nothing in the criminal code, for example, that says an RCMP officer can't enforce the criminal code in one particular place. They can enforce it anywhere in Canada.
I'm not sure where you're going with this, but I think, in fact, like, for instance, anybody can enforce if you find somebody committing under the criminal code. So you don't even have to be a police officer. But there is a jurisdiction where, obviously, if police and public safety is involved and you are standing there, you have to act on that. Any police officer has to act on that. But
Including RCMP officers.
Yes, including RCMP officers.
Okay, so just to use sort of a bit of a silly example, if we have an RCMP officer that's standing on Wellington Street in Ottawa and they see somebody committing an offense under the criminal code, they don't need to call up Ottawa Police Service to arrest the person. They can go and arrest the person themselves.
Yes.
Right? Okay. And now we've heard a lot about, the appointment of special constables under Section 53 of the Police Services Act. Right? And what that does, it gives an RCMP officer who's appointed a special constable the powers to enforce provincial and municipal authorities that, Ottawa Police Service would be allowed to do.
Yes.
And this would be in addition to the power to enforce the criminal code, which they always have.
Yes.
All right. And now, it's fair to say that, during these protests, criminal code offenses were being violated. You'll agree with that?
There were some, yes.
Some. And I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but there was an injunction that was granted in Ottawa in relation to several City of Ottawa bylaws, which include, open air bylaws, fireworks bylaws, noise bylaws. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
All right. And you'll agree, of course, that an injunction is a court order.
Yes.
And Section 127 of the Criminal Code makes it a criminal offense to breach a court order. You'll agree?
Well, with injunctions, though, usually there has to be an enforcement order attached to the injunction that we would allow police to enforce the injunction. So I don't know if there was any enforcement order attached to that.
Okay, so if I was to say to you, hypothetically, if there was an enforcement order that's attached, a police officer could arrest somebody for breaching a court order, in this case, an injunction.
I'm not sure. I'm not a lawyer. I honestly don't know the answer to that question.
So you don't know whether a police officer is allowed to, under Section 127, to arrest someone if they're violating a court order?
No, you weren't asking that. You were asking the RCMP in Ottawa, and it's not our jurisdiction, so I would have to refer to my legal people to ask that question, and we do that all the time when it comes to enforcement.
Okay, so if it fell within the ambit of Section 127, which speaks to breaching a court order, an RCMP officer could arrest a person for that, right?
But I'm not sure how the injunction was obtained, if it falls under the criminal code and if it's an actual court order that's breachable. I'd have to do a little bit more research. Sorry.
Sure. Okay, so leaving aside, the research you say you need to do, if I was to put to you, and I can bring up section 127 if that would assist, Mr. Registrar, that is CCF 6028. And it's page 230. So we see over there 127 says, everyone who without lawful excuse disobeys a lawful order made by a court of justice or by a person or body of persons authorized by any act to make or give the order other than an order for the payment of money is unless, and it talks about the punishment. So you'd agree though that an RCMP officer who has the ability to enforce the criminal code and always has this ability could arrest somebody under section 127 for violating 127.
But you were referring to the injunction, and I don't know if an injunction falls under the disobeying or an order of the court.
That's fine, but my question now is whether an officer, an RCMP officer, could arrest someone for contravening section 127 of the code.
In all likelihood, yes.
All right, so my question to you, or I put to you that, there's nothing that legally prevented you from deploying RCMP officers to enforce the criminal code in Ottawa.
But we aren't the police of jurisdiction in Ottawa. And so it is, I don't know if it's a common law or what authority it is. It would be like bringing Ottawa Police Service and then putting them in downtown Toronto and saying, we're just going to start policing. Everybody, there's a jurisdiction and there's a police of jurisdiction for a reason. And so if I find somebody committing a criminal code offense and I see them committing and it's under the powers of arrest that I can in fact arrest, I can arrest. But for the purpose of this exercise, we would not simply walk in and decide that we were the police of jurisdiction. Could you imagine the mayhem that would lead to if every police just arrived and said, we're going to be the police of jurisdiction today?
So I just want to sort of clarify, there may be a difference between, say, tradition and respecting the authority of local police and not intruding on them or entrenching on them. But you'll agree that there is nothing that legally prevented you from sending RCMP officers to enforce the things that they're always allowed to do, which is the criminal code.
Yes, and we weren't objecting to assisting in that regard. So that's why I'm not understanding your questions.
All right, those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.